And good morning, fellas. Here we are again. Steve, again, thank you for that hymn this morning. We're all familiar with the Lord's Prayer, of course, and but that was a different new arrangement by Seelan. Thank you very much. We want to continue our study this morning. It's kind of a piggyback of last week. Actually, in a larger sense, they all are piggybacks because we're working through it verse by verse. And sometimes in a very literal sense, like this morning, one verse. And let's dive into it, and I'll make the correlations as they come about. We are now transitioned from the death itself. There are going to be a few. We're now in that interim time between Jesus is still on the cross. We'll move into the tomb. There'll be a silence and then resurrection morning beginning in chapter 20. So there are, I think, chapter 19 ends in verse 41 or 42. So we're in this interim time, but we have made a clear transition from leading up to the cross to the it is finished to now belief. We're going to be exploring belief, and there's some really interesting and enjoyable um, aspects of this that we're going to be looking into. I think you guys will really like this. But this morning, we're going to introduce that idea with what belief looks like, and we're going to be looking at it from this morning from one angle, but we're going to be looking at this idea from different points of view through the various people in the story. And we've got a lot to explore, a lot of fun stuff. Um, this this verse 35, John writes, and it's a writing of an interruption within his narrative. Clearly, he clearly stops the audience in their tracks and makes this statement, which ties into what we looked at last week. John says, and he who has seen has testified himself, and his testimony is true. And he knows that he is telling the truth, three statements about truth, so that, here's the reason, you, audience, also may believe. It's an invitation into what he is currently writing in the prior verses. He's calling attention to what we just looked at last week. And that's where our heads are going to be this morning. John stops his narrative, as I already said, and calls his audience to an attention. He's saying, please take a look at this. And here are the three facets of what we looked at last week. The Roman force, brutal force exerted through the Roman machine, the Roman military. Religious control continues, Roman force continues, and blood and water flow from the pierced one, Jesus, on the cross. Those are the three aspects that are happening that John is calling us attention to. He's not asking us to look forward. They don't know what forward, the original audience, or those in the text themselves don't know about Sunday morning yet. They're in the dark, as we will see. And so John is not asking us to look forward, but backward. He is telling us that how we see what happened right in front of our face, right here, right now, it depends on perception. We all look at a happening from a perception that we bring to the table. And before before explanation, rather, is perception. So the idea being here, we all come to the resurrection with a matter of perception. That's what we're going to be seeing. That perception is what we bring to the table, and that informs our understanding, what's in our head. And only through that understanding is explanation. So that's a really good sequence of how to think about what we're going to be talking about. These characters, these participants within the story are all experiencing resurrection from their own perception, just like we do. We experience truth from what we bring to that truth at that moment. And that is based on our upbringing and our political belief system and our religious belief system and how we've been treated, our woundings and our joys. That all makes up what we bring to inform our perception of what we're seeing. And then that eventually leads to how we explain it. So as we begin, it's a story, my story, part of my story. In my earlier years in the church or as a follower of Jesus, I was taught to see, this is very true of my early upbringing. Not my early upbringing, which when I came to this point at 19, I thought my early upbringing was nullified and didn't count. And I have, I have totally rethought that whole thing. I was raised in the First Presbyterian Church in Fort Collins, Colorado, where we all have attended at times in our own history. But when I had a born again experience at 19, I somehow got the idea that all wasn't good enough. And now this is what really counted. Now, it didn't take, let's say 10 years later or so, I started to realize that no, this is not, it didn't start when I was 19. It started at my birth. And I was part of the church, although I didn't embrace it at that time. But in this 19 year, when I was 19 years old, I came into a um, part of the Jesus movement. I attended at that time, a Baptist church. And at that time, I really started becoming interested in the Bible and how to understand it. And I was taught to see the pierced side in this text, the pierced side of Jesus, as a kind of proof. It was all about proof that Jesus truly is dead. We have to have a dead Jesus. And the reason of that is because unless Jesus dies, my sin payment has been made. It's the whole idea of the penal substitutionary atonement, that there has to be a death, Jesus, that has to be true. So we need to verify that he's dead through the piercing of the side, because if he's not dead, then my sins aren't paid for. And I'm destined to eternal conscious torment. But that's how I was taught. And then the resurrection, the cross is kind of a baseline for the resurrection that follows 3 days later, which is also a type of proof that it's a validation that he really did die. And now the reverse of that, now he's alive. And the whole thing becomes a proof that my sins are paid for. That's how I understood it. And I think a lot of us as followers of Jesus, that's how at least we enter into understanding that this text right in front of us. However, on the flip side, John's purpose, at least from my perspective, is not that at all. That is something that was induced by a later church theology that I became part of when I was younger. But John is writing from an entirely different era, and I think his purpose is very different. And his purpose is to invite us, his audience, both the initial audience and generations, into a way of seeing reality that reshapes how life is lived today. I think that is really the tenor of the New Testament. How do we live today? And so this man sitting here at his desk having his quiet time, he's reading the text just like you and I read the text in relation to our relations. There's his relationship with his wife, Marge. There's his kids, Joe next door, and his coworkers. And the what John is leading us towards is this for us, living life in the here and now. And unfortunately, especially in my earlier days, belief meant ideas. Now, this throughout the gospel, throughout John's gospel, and I would add from a broader sense, the New Testament, and I would say even broader that, the Bible itself, belief is never reduced to agreeing with a set of ideas. In my circles, from the Protestant, first of all, fundamental, and then evangelical that grew out of that, from those perceptions, the whole thing about belief were, what do you believe? It's all about what are the things you believe and whether I can agree with you in your beliefs. That is really the bulk of what my Christian faith was about. And later on, with Steve and I were involved in the Brethren, which I'm very grateful for, our shared heritage of rich, wonderful, wonderful people and the Bible teaching. A lot of it was around knowledge, gaining knowledge. And I don't fault that at all. I am grateful for what I received. But belief, according to John, is even more than that. The word that John uses in the Greek translation, it implies participation, a reliance. And here's a good distinction. The word used, translated belief, pisteo, is that's the Greek term. You can look it up. It means a believing into. It's actually an emerging into something versus a believing of a fact. So you could say believing into versus believing that. I believe that. That's not what he's talking about. It's I'm believing and it is affecting my life thus and so. That's what belief means, an engagement within. So that's what he's talking about. And I think I would go so far to say that that is what the New Testament is talking about. Belief is not something we hold in our heads. We've made it that. Not all we, but I'm talking about me and the we that I've hung around with. It's belief is about what's in our heads. It's something that takes, but rather it's something that takes shape in our bodies, in our relationships, like the man sitting here, and responses to the world as it actually is. It's in the here and now. So what does John want us to believe? He's calling his audience to attention at this moment for what has just happened. But what is that? And that's what this session is all about. That's what we're going to look at. There's 4 points. There's 4 aspects that I've drawn from the text and from what's happening right here in front of us. And we're going to look at each one briefly, and then we'll have a summary of the 4 in a concise sense so you can bring it all together in your heads, and then we'll have a discussion. That's what this is all about. First of all, what belief looks like. First, number 1, belief looks like learning to live without resorting to force or control. These are a bit long, so bear with me. Belief looks like learning to live our lives without having to resort to forcing or control. And I get that from the text right here, Jesus' demonstration on the cross. Now, a little commentary. John has just shown us a world that continues to operate by domination, the Roman, nothing changes. And in the Roman rule and then in the religious rule, life is continued. They're preparing for the Passover. And so this is life happening in front of us. And to believe is not to deny that reality. We're not asking the world to change how it's operating. But what it does do is belief chooses not to feed it. Because as we feed it, we give it strength. And that is a major point of what we see right in front of us. To believe is, let me make an attempt at defining, to believe is to trust that violence does not heal. We see that in Jesus' demonstration through his death. Coercion does not save, and control does not produce life. Even when those methods seem effective or necessary. Man, this could be a whole discussion in itself. But going back to what is right in front of us, the death of Jesus, we see him absorbing what's happening to him versus any type of retaliation. Number two, belief looks like remaining. It's all about staying within, staying present within, in the realm of suffering without withdrawal. There was no retaliation. There was no withdrawal. Jesus doesn't attempt to escape pain. He doesn't, again, retaliate. There's another, or numb. Now, that has not been true in my own life. When I experience pain, I naturally try to blame someone else, escape it, or retaliate by blaming something or someone else, or numbing myself through own personal pleasures, whatever those might be, because life is too painful. At the moment, I have to do something to compensate. That is the human mechanism of us all. But Jesus doesn't do that. He absorbs the entirety. As the scriptures read, he is the lamb slain. Even in death, now I'm using this as a metaphor. Jesus expires. Yes, I understand that. But metaphorically, I think what John is showing us, this is, again, my perception, that even in death, life, symbolized by the blood and the water, continues to flow from him. Now, that is a metaphor, guys. I understand that. But I believe the blood and the water exemplify life and community, the two, blood and water. That's, again, I'm not alone, but that's how I see it. To believe, then, is to live in a way that doesn't abandon love when it's wounded. Here's the application. What this means right here is this, the way it's stated, that when I am being ostracized or criticized or hurt to some degree, it comes out of hurt and pain. I stay within that and continue to love even through the woundedness. That's what we see demonstrated on the cross through Jesus. He absorbs the entirety, the worst of what humans can do to another human in the name of God, in this case. And he remains in love when he himself is wounded. And that is a challenging, that is huge. And I have failed numerous times because of my own need to self-protect and to lash out or to numb, bury my head in the sand, and channel my energies elsewhere where I can receive something for me. That is our human condition. Belief is choosing staying within. It's the idea of staying within, and this is only done through our faith. The only reason I would do this is because I believe in something bigger. I choose to stay within over self-protecting. That takes that takes faith. I believe it takes courage and it takes humility. Another is presence over escape. I stay within. It's the idea of staying within rather than everything inside of me wants to get out of Dodge. And then the last is giving. I give, I extend love over grasping what I need at the moment. That's what this second idea is saying, staying instead of leaving. Third, belief looks like trusting that life is still at work. This is another aspect of faith, belief. Still at work where death appears to dominate. Everything inside of me, the wheels have fallen off. And belief is staying there with the trust that it's not over yet. Certainly, the cross is representative of that. As we're going to see in the weeks to follow in this interim period, our participants within this think it's over. And and rightly so. Blood and water flowing from Jesus' side reveal that death does not have the final word on reality. Again, another metaphor, fellas. But I believe that it ties in, from my perspective, of what John is asking us to focus on at this moment. When it all feels like it's exhausted, it all feels it's over, it's not over. But belief does not, just a side here. 30 years ago, I was having a really difficult time in my company, and Bob Powell was really walked alongside of me as a friend during this time. And it had a lot to do with me. But I read a book called Good to Great by Collins. And that book, I digested that book about the philosophy. It was a research book, but I could really tie into that. And there were a handful of things I remember, and one of those through John Collins, I think the author, but great book. But the truth was, after multiple companies that moved from a good to great, one of the truths was no matter how hard it was, they kept showing up. I could really grasp that. And there was a time in my own company where the bank had called my loan, and I had 30 days to come up with a well into six figures. It was very bleak, but that book, based on numerous examples of research, said, if you continue to show up, you can make it through this. And I believed it. And I made the vow at that time that I'm going to show up to work every morning and I'm going to continue to show up until there's a padlock on the door. I actually used that term. And Bob was one very close friend at that time. Um, Peter Way, who you know, yeah, there's the book right there, Good to Great. Peter Way, who you know, Steve, came alongside of me as a friend, very different than me, and we worked together in what we called the foxhole every day until we slowly things started kind of coming our way, and it was a marvelous thing. But Jesus shows that staying power by staying within a very difficult, I mean, crucifixion. Um, Belief does not require denying sorrow or rushing past grief. We just don't go through it with a 20-minute quiet time. It's about staying within where I am at the time. And Jesus is demonstrating that, and it's belief. It's learning to live as if life is still possible, still moving, like as long as there's no padlock, I'm going to show up. If life is still possible, still moving, still being given, even in places pierced by loss. There's the analogy again, the pierced by loss. Finally, the last one, belief looks like bearing witness through how we live. Now we switch from Jesus to John, and this is what John is calling us attention to. I love his terminology. Three things. He says three times, three different ways. Take a look, folks, so that you also may believe. John does not argue. He's not making a theological debate over this at all. It's no time nor place for this. He simply testifies. He's simply stating what he has experienced. What a powerful, simple, but powerful idea. His life has been shaped by what he has seen, what he's seen. And now he invites others into the same vision. What a simple, novel idea. Oh, it's so beautiful. He's simply testifying. Belief becomes visible not through certainty or correctness, but through embodied trust, rather. How we love, how we suffer, how we resist mirroring the world's ways of power. In other words, I don't get out a bigger club to do damage on someone else. Now, we're going to summarize those, and these will really come into focus, and then we're going to talk about them. Here are the five in this session. As we look through what John is saying through his testimony, we're going to see others, and there's a lot of cohesion in this whole thing. Here are the five in a concise way. It means living without force, living life without forcing others to conform. And I've become really good at how to do that. I want to become less good at it. Staying present in suffering, staying within the moment, present in suffering. And I got to believe that God will give me grace in that moment, trusting life where death seems strongest. I'm going to continue to stay with the idea of not only staying, but there is life for me through this staying. Bearing witness through how we live. It is really all about how we live. in my circles, much of my belief has centered around beliefs, and we need that. But the New Testament writers, I'm convinced, it's all about living life in the now, in the here and now. And we all have opportunity to bear witness to what that looks like in any given time. So here are the five: living without force, staying present in suffering, trusting life where death seems strongest, and bearing witness through how we live every moment of every day. And here's our question to bring to all of us. I'd like to hear from you guys. Which of these five are most challenging for you right now where you are in your journey? And talk about it. Why do you think so? Why are they a challenge? I'm also okay with you just responding, say which one really grabs your attention and why. That's fine too. But let's hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on these five aspects of belief? Oh, we got Tatsi. Hey, and Carl, thanks for joining. I just expanded my window so I could see you, all of you. I think I've got everybody, but go ahead and speak out, fellas.
Well, looking at that staying present in suffering, there's a couple books that have been around now. One's Richard Rohr and the other's by Walter Brueggemann that deal with the idea of lamentation and that you need to lament. And if you don't lament, it's hard to move forward because you got to acknowledge the pain and suffering. So I'm trying to fit those two together because I think they give us some insight here. But uh, I'm trying to understand the point of lamentation, and I'm just saying I don't have any answers. I'm just saying that's kind of in my thinking right now and trying to understand it. So if anyone has any insight to that, that'll be helpful. But all the prophets have to go through a period of lamentation before they come out of it with with answers, if you will. You know.
So people, what you're asking, Bill, is you've become really fascinated through Richard Rohr and Walter Brueggemann about this idea of lamenting. And you're
Yeah.
asking, can someone help you with the language of why and what is the purpose of that?
Yeah. What's the point? There's
Yeah.
a reason.
Yeah, that's
You
a great
don't. You're
question.
not supposed. Yeah. You're not supposed to avoid it.
Yeah, and we hit on that this morning. What do you guys have to say?
To do with, and boy, I don't have this formulated, but is part of learning to lament basically coming to see or maybe to believe in a sense as God sees, um, to lament the in a sense the suffering of a broken world. And to some degree, when we gain an awareness, or I'll just use the word, that's commonly used when we gain his heart for the world. In part, we do that through lamentation over what isn't right yet. And so maybe to come back to this morning's Lord's Prayer, we cry out for his kingdom to come. And then we seek it through your word, orthopraxy, to some degree.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Other responses to Bill's question.
Well, I want to add to it. Have any of you folks seen the movie The Matrix?
Yeah.
If you haven't, it's a movie. It's a sci-fi movie, basically. But there's the guy that finds out he's living in a false world. He's living in a world of the computer's designed for him. Actually, his body's sitting in a cell somewhere producing electricity to feed it, just no purpose of existence other than feeding it. And these people come to him and bring him an awareness of that. And he sees how awful it is. And they said, now you have a choice here. There's this pill and there's that pill. If you take this pill, you'll go back to where you were, happy and content that you're living in your world of illusion, and this will be it. Or you take the other pill that you will never go back to that world. You'll see the world as it is, and then we'll fight to try to change the world as it is. Now, fighting is not what we're called for here.
Right. Yeah.
But the point is, seeing the world as it is something we like right now in our country. But I think when we were visiting in Europe, we were in Budapest and Hungary, and I mean for those guys, wars and revolutions and things like that were very contemporary. They were 50 years old. They were 20 years old. They were living in that kind of distressed world, and I go like, my God, how do you live in that world? And maybe I'm the one that's being deceived. But the idea is embracing the fact that life either you're being sheltered from all the pain or that you're in the pain, but there's pain out there.
Okay. Yeah. And with that question, Bill, why should I enter into that pain with my fellow human being? Why? That's what you're asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, faith without works is dead. That's James. But God calls us into a life of self-giving sacrifice, and we haven't touched that yet. But you go back to the early church. I mean, there were the marginalized people that were in the church, and there were people that are pretty wealthy, and there was an agreement that you're here to help level the playing field. You're here to help the people in need that don't have things, and help them get through it. And it's sort of a voluntary form of communism. I know that's what they're accused of, but the problem was everyone's going to have to pay the piper in some way so that we all get through this together. And that didn't last long, you know. But it kind of sits out there. It's in the Bible for a reason, and I struggle with that.
We are in our westernized way of thinking, and all I know is our way of thinking. I don't know because this is when I'm living, but how I was raised, and even in our Christian context, we assume we're individuals first.
Yeah.
And I'm an individual, and you, Bill, are an individual, and we may choose to sit down and have coffee with one another as two individuals sharing something together of which is not well defined. That is how most of us think. That is not the biblical context. We are first part of a body. We are part of something bigger. That's reality, and we're individual members within that body. And if you and I start reading Richard Rohr and Walter Brueggemann and thinking of lament from that perspective, that it's lamenting my brother or my sister's pain is not optional. It is part of reality because they are part of me and I am part of them. That is a really rough construct to get through, but that is it.
Yeah. So the challenge is if you don't let that drag you down. There's a difference between lamenting and not letting it drag you into depression. I don't know how to answer that, but you're not supposed to live a life of perpetual depression. He didn't call us into that.
You know, and I may have difficulty in saying this, but I think there's a context to these practices that you've laid out here on the screen that's before us right now. But we started out with the question, what is belief? And I believe there's a level that's above this, which is the belief is that we believe that God created a perfect world. That was his intent. His intent was to create a perfect world where there's no more sickness, no more dying. Everything functions in relationships the way he intended, and that got broken in the garden. And now he's on a journey of restoring to his intent, and he will succeed at that. We will have that new heaven and new earth. But what we're laying out here are practices that he invites us in to join him in his work of redemption back to what he initially intended in creation. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of what I've been
Thinking about, yeah.
yeah, I've been thinking about is in this discussion. You know, you talk about why do we lament? We lament because the world's not perfect and it creates challenges as we live, but we're joining God in his work of redemption. And that brings in the lament.
And if we don't think the world's hard or lamenting, we haven't, somewhere down the line, we're going to die. Somewhere down the line, people we love are going to die. They're going to get auto accidents, they're going to have heart attacks, they're going to get cancer. And we're going to understand lamenting at those points in time. And at the very end of it, we'll lament our own death. But it's kind of like you can't escape it.
Okay, so let me ask you, Bob and Bill, and I'm piggybacking on what Bob brought up in the overarching idea, the whole story. So as I enter the lament of someone else, is that a kind of a calming until God can do his work? Or does it actually an agency of bringing calming and life to that individual?
Yeah, my first take on that is it's a reaction. The second premise that you put out there.
Well, Bob, you've done a lot of funerals. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't go to funerals because they don't want to face this. But yeah,
And that's very real. That's very true.
yeah.
Uh,
When someone's in grief, as I read it in different places, you don't run up to them and give them some kind of spiritual bromides, like yeah, your beloved is now in God's garden. So you just sit there and well, and Jews sat in Shiva. You just sit with them. You be present. Being present while they
I've been
suffer.
in those. I've been in
Yeah.
those. It's just an amazing thing to watch uh, in a Jewish funeral. Just the quietness of which their community gathers, and they come in and just sit and they read scripture. One might read scripture and listen to it. They just sit in silence and support. And it goes on. That goes on for about 24 hours.
Back to Mike's comment about being there. Just show up
Yeah,
and be there.
I've been there because they had to have a place and there had to be a host there, and so I was the one that stayed with them in the funeral home
So
over those
Bob,
20.
sorry, I've got a question, Bob, and I kind of cut you off there at the end.
No, that's okay.
So in your experience in what you do, what you've been doing now for 20 years, I assume.
Well, not quite, just about
Yeah,
16.
but I mean, you are no novice. You've seen grieving, you've seen lamenting, you've seen people entering into this space together over and over and over. You've seen this. And
Hmm.
in your experience, would you say, is it more true that entering lamenting leads to depression, or does it lead to more life and that which is good?
Well, I think it leads to more life. Um, and I'm going to share something that just happened yesterday. Um, we were helping a family. We were helping with a son. He was an only son, He lost his dad to death probably 7 or 8 years ago, and we buried his mom yesterday in Fort Logan. And he was having a terrible, terrible time coping with grief. I mean, it just seems like tears were coming constantly, and this was throughout the days. And then his kids were coming, and they were struggling. He had a son and a daughter, and they were also struggling. And they didn't want to do a formal committal with a pastor or anything like that. Um, at the graveside, all they simply wanted to do was go and witness the burial of the casket, the lowering the casket into the ground. That's all he wanted to do. And so he had no pastor there, nothing had he made arrangements for or asked us to help him make arrangements. And we did the funeral on Monday and then the burial yesterday. And at the reception of the funeral, I went up and I said, "Hey, would you be okay if just before we lower the casket, if I said a few brief words and had a prayer?" And he said, his face just lit up and he said, "Would you?" And I said, "I sure would. I will do that."
That's good.
And so in the strict protocol of the military, of the Veterans Administration, that's really a little bit out of bounds. They don't want when you go actually out to the grave at Fort Logan, there's to be no, their words are, there's to be no graveside service, okay? So um, when I got there yesterday morning, I cleared it with the rep. I said, "I'd like to say just a few words." She said, "Oh, that's perfectly fine." The accommodation of the military has just been amazing, the way
Yeah.
they will work with you. And so I did that. And when I finished my prayer and people started to raise their head again, the tears were really flowing. There was a release of that grief. And the tears were flowing, and so I walked with Bill back to his car. He stopped me right in the middle of the street and he says, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "You sure can." And we stood there and I was just holding him. And it just seemed to be a release of grief.
Yes.
And and then we went and did a little bit more business. We have to get out of the actual cemetery part, and we went over to the visitor center, and we did finished up a little bit of business, and he could not stop thanking me enough. And I thought, wow, it was something by just being present with the Word of God, it released something in him and hopefully set him on a path that broke that grief that he had been carrying for, the 3 or 4 days as we led up to the actual service and burial on Monday and Tuesday. It just, maybe I've rambled and maybe I haven't answered the question, but
No, you didn't ramble.
No, that's perfect.
that was that is what belief means. And this list that's on our screen in front of us, these are actions that can be taken that joins God in his work of redemption, bringing his creation back to what was originally intended.
So in that moment, Bob, you wonderfully and compassionately entered the lament of
Right.
the family.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
You
Yeah.
didn't have to do that, but you did. And you had the freedom to do that, and you entered in, and as a result, there was goodness that came out of it. I would call it life.
Right.
But
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, after years and years of doing this, but by the way to go, Bob. Why do we not enter? Why do we choose not to enter lament? And this
That's a
goes back
great
to Bill's
question.
great question. What have
That's a
you observed why we don't?
well, I think we're all a little bit timid, you know, and we have opportunities to do that, and we just kind of don't take that step forward to do it. I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
I just was when I learned that they were going to be burying a mom after we'd had a Christian service. We'd had a Christian service on Monday, and there was going to be nothing at the point where his mom was going to be laid to rest in that grave in that beautiful place at Fort Logan. And she's going to be there until Jesus comes back and raises her out.
Yeah.
And it just, it just, I just was felt led, I guess, on Monday to do that. I learned that he was going to have that. And I hadn't been in the time that they were making the arrangements. That's not the role that I play in funeral service. But when I learned that that was going to happen, I thought that's not right. We need to do a final, uh, just a few words. It probably didn't take more than 2 or 3 minutes to do an acknowledgement of what God had done in Lori's life. That's his mom, in Lori's life. What he'd done in her life, and to acknowledge that, and that, and to and to remind the family of God's presence as they go forward. That in time, they're still in grief, but in time, they will realize that the full redemptive power of God in their lives and in their mom's life.
So in that moment, you didn't have to do that.
I didn't know, it was just something. We were just standing around the reception, and I heard our director, who had is the one that had met with the family and made all the arrangements. And then what normally happens, the director meets with the family, and then we then fulfill the wishes of the family. And so I knew she was just explaining what the next day. She was tied up yesterday. She couldn't go. She said, "Bob, would you go and do this?" And I said, "Sure." She didn't know. It was basically just to do the burial.
Right.
He didn't know I was going to speak. And I said, Jennifer, if you're okay with this, I'm going to speak if Fort Logan will allow me to do that in that setting.
So
Hey,
you
Bob,
you
Bob, oh,
Yeah.
Bob, would you say that we're all grieve somewhere? If you don't grieve at the time of the burial, it's going to bottle up in you and boil out some other way, maybe not as healthy in your life.
100%.
Yeah.
and I've got a question for Bob too, and because of time. After you overcame, I mean, you didn't cognizantly think about your own timidity. You just felt this,
No, I just said
and
this.
you're free enough to do it. But for those of us who are not that place where you are, you chose to enter that space primarily to provide something for the family and what was appropriate, but you came away with that, and I got to believe you came away with something in yourself. Can you
I
put it into words what you felt like?
Yeah, and I came home and I said to Sandy, I said, and I've done this so many times, gone through the same thing, maybe not speaking. I just saw the profound grief in the family. I was aware of that. And here we were going to bury his mom, who had lived a life of faith with that son and grandkids, and we were just going to place her remains in the ground with nothing being done. And I came home and said to Sandy, I said, this has been a really, really great day.
Oh, right. So that, Bob, we didn't orchestrate this, but you have answered in a profound way through a story from yesterday, Bill's question, which he thoughtfully brought to the group. And I hope that over the course of this week, we can each ponder the question and how you responded wonderfully. Thank you.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
Hey, Bob, thank you for that story. It's a boldness that we can all learn from. And there's times when I've thought in my life I should step forward and say something, and because of the lack of boldness. And boy, I really appreciate that story you just gave. And it tells me one of the things that Mike has put up, the bearing witness through how we live. And we can all learn from that story. So I want to thank you for that.
Agreed. Good word, Dean. Great
Yeah,
way.
thank you, Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Dean.
I what you've laid out today, Mike, is really, really good. I think we just need to keep it in context that there are many things we can do to join God in his redemptive work in people's lives.
There you go. Yes, agreed. I couldn't agree more. Well, we've got more to come, fellas. And Bob, again, it wasn't orchestrated, but it was an amazing symphonic piece this morning by you guys, Bill and Bob. Thank you. Guys, we will meet next week. I'll be here. Today is the 20. Oh, I got December up there. No, that's not the right calendar. Today's the 25th. No. I'm on the wrong date. I'm in the middle of putting things in my calendar. Today is the 25th, right?
Right.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, it was in March. It's the same. Anyway, I'll be here next week, and we'll look forward to it as we move forward in the Gospel of John. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your input today. Have a good week. Bye now.